You open your eyes and your heart begins to race immediately. The room remains completely quiet. The sun still sits well below the horizon, casting pale shadows across the ceiling. You pick up the cold smartphone from your nightstand and see a specific name flashing on the glowing screen. Your chest tightens instinctively, your breathing becomes remarkably shallow, and you start running through complex defensive scenarios in your head before your feet even touch the floor. For the human nervous system, this precise biological reaction evolved over millennia to keep you alive during a sudden physical attack. You experience the exact physiological cascade that occurs when a lethal predator steps into your clearing. You lay in a secure, climate-controlled room under a soft blanket, yet your internal threat detection system reacts as if death is imminent. The perceived predator is a middle manager sitting in a glass office 20 miles away. Let us look closely at the underlying biology of this morning reaction. In 1996, neuroscientist Joseph Ledoux published his groundbreaking research on the amygdala, mapping exactly how the human brain processes fear and anxiety. When you perceive an external threat, your eyes send a direct neural signal to the amygdala, completely bypassing the rational prefrontal cortex. Your body floods with adrenaline and cortisol in milliseconds. Your digestion stops, your blood pressure spikes, your heart rate increases dramatically, and your muscles tense for impact. You prepare to sprint or fight for your survival. But the human brain cannot differentiate between a physical predator and a psychological one. When your supervisor sends a vague message saying they need to speak with you immediately, your amygdala triggers the exact same chemical flood. You cannot sprint away from a corporate calendar invite. You sit perfectly still at your desk while your biological system absorbs massive amounts of toxic stress hormones. We tolerate this hostile environment because we inherited a deeply flawed organizational structure. In 1911, mechanical engineer Frederick Winslow Taylor published a highly influential book called The Principles of Scientific Management. He introduced a radical concept to the industrial world, arguing that workers should possess absolutely no autonomy over their tasks. Taylor conducted famous experiments at the Bethlehem Steel Yard, measuring every single movement of laborers with a stopwatch to optimize the shoveling of iron ore. He believed daily labor should be broken down into repetitive motions and strictly monitored by a new class of employees called managers. The sole purpose of these managers involved enforcing absolute compliance and extracting maximum efficiency from the human machine. The psychological state of the worker held zero value in this system. We brought the rigid, punitive structure of the 1911 factory floor directly into the modern office space. Your abusive manager operates on a 100-year-old framework designed specifically to strip you of your personal autonomy. We can see the biological consequences of this rigid hierarchy by looking at primates. Starting in the late 1970s, neurobiologist Robert Sapolsky spent over 3 decades studying wild olive baboons in the Serengeti of East Africa. He took blood samples from the animals to measure their resting cortisol levels and evaluate their overall health. The baboons living under abusive dominant males showed chronically elevated stress hormones. These subordinate animals suffered from high blood pressure, their immune systems failed to produce antibodies, their reproductive systems shut down, and they developed early stages of cardiovascular disease. The dominant alpha males maintained control through random, completely unpredictable aggression. They attacked subordinates without provocation just to enforce status within the troop. The subordinates lived in a continuous state of hypervigilance, never knowing when the next attack would arrive. Your modern corporate office function operates on the exact same biological matrix. This unpredictability perfectly mirrors the core mechanism of workplace toxicity. Psychologists Paul Bobiak and Robert Hare published a landmark study in 2006 detailing the prevalence of psychopathic traits among corporate professionals. They evaluated hundreds of executives and discovered that psychopathic traits were heavily overrepresented in management positions compared to the general population. These individuals thrive on creating chaos, shifting expectations daily without warning, withholding critical information, taking credit for your successes, and distributing blame for their own failures. Your exhaustion serves as the calculated result of their management style. You exhaust your cognitive resources trying to anticipate their shifting moods. You spend your evenings analyzing past conversations and drafting defensive emails in your head while trying to fall asleep. This constant state of hypervigilance destroys your ability to recover physically during the night. Sleep researcher Matthew Walker published extensive data on how the human brain processes emotional trauma during the rapid eye movement sleep cycle. When you sleep deeply, your brain normally strips the visceral emotional charge away from the difficult memories of the day, allowing you to process events rationally the next morning. An abusive boss robs you of this biological reset mechanism. Because your amygdala remains active, your brain refuses to enter deep sleep, believing the environment remains unsafe. You experience heavily fragmented sleep, waking up at 3 in the morning with your heart pounding. Without that crucial recovery sleep, your emotional regulation centers begin to fail, leaving you increasingly reactive. The toxic management style creates a deliberate cycle of physical exhaustion that leaves you highly susceptible to further manipulation. They manipulate your perception of reality to maintain dominance over your career. Cognitive psychologist Elizabeth Loftus spent decades studying the extreme malleability of human memory, proving that memories are fragile and easily altered by suggestive language. Toxic managers exploit this vulnerability intuitively, engaging in verbal manipulation to destabilize your confidence. They give you a specific instruction on Tuesday, you execute the instruction perfectly on Wednesday, and on Thursday, they reprimand you severely for doing exactly what they asked. They deny the original conversation ever took place. You stop trusting your own cognitive faculties after experiencing this repeatedly. You start recording conversations secretly and saving every minor email in multiple folders just to prove your sanity to yourself. You spend your valuable intellectual resources building a comprehensive legal defense against your own employer. The physical cost of this environment proves measurable and devastating to the human body. Sir Michael Marmot began the famous Whitehall study in 1967. Tracking the health of 18,000 British civil servants over several decades. He discovered a brutal reality about workplace stress, noting that the employees with the highest rates of heart disease and mortality were those stationed at the bottom of the administrative hierarchy. These individuals faced intense psychological demands while possessing zero control over their daily tasks. The combination of high pressure and total powerlessness destroyed their cardiovascular systems over time. People working under micromanagers experience this specific combination daily, being held fully responsible for outcomes while being denied the authority to make decisions. Your peace vanishes because your biological system remains stuck in a rigid cycle of responsibility without power. You cannot change their behavior through dialogue. Therapy literature often suggests communication strategies, telling you to set clear expectations or have open conversations with difficult leaders. These approaches assume you face a rational actor who values your well-being. But a toxic boss operates on a completely different set of incentives. They secure their position through dominance alone, using any vulnerability you show as leverage against you. If you ask for clarity, they will accuse you of incompetence. You must abandon the hope that they will wake up one day and recognize your value. You also cannot rely on human resources, as corporations created HR departments specifically to protect themselves from legal liability. They exist solely to mitigate risk for the executives, and unless your boss violates a specific labor law that could result in a massive lawsuit, HR will protect the established hierarchy. You protect your nervous system by changing the rules of engagement entirely. Clinical psychologists refer to the most effective survival strategy as the gray rock method. You become completely uninteresting, removing all emotional resonance from your professional interactions. When the boss launches into a passive-aggressive critique, your face remains completely blank. You slow down your breathing, wait patiently for them to finish speaking, offer a brief, factual acknowledgement, and refuse to defend yourself or over-explain your actions. You provide flat, monotonous answers. The toxic manager feeds heavily on emotional reactions, wanting to see your visible frustration so they can label you as uncooperative. When you provide zero emotional friction, their attacks lose momentum rapidly. This strategy requires rigorous internal discipline. You must physically train your body to stop reacting to their daily provocations. When a stressful email arrives, you refuse to open it immediately, waiting exactly 5 minutes while breathing deeply into your diaphragm to activate your vagus nerve. This physical action forces your heart rate to drop significantly, signaling to your amygdala that you remain safe from immediate physical harm. You read the email as if you observe a strange insect in a laboratory, analyzing the text strictly for factual requests and ignoring the emotional manipulation embedded deeply in the words. You respond exclusively to the facts. If the email contains 50 words of insults and one request for a financial report, you send the report and ignore the 50 words entirely. Suppressing your emotional response carries its own biological cost over time. Psychologist James Pennebaker conducted decades of research on the physical toll of holding in traumatic experiences, discovering that actively hiding your emotions requires continuous physical exertion from your central nervous system. When you sit in a meeting and force yourself to smile at a manager who actively sabotages you, your body works twice as hard as normal. You consume massive amounts of glucose to keep your facial muscles perfectly neutral, your white blood cell count drops, and your immune system becomes heavily compromised. You catch illnesses more frequently than your peers. The gray rock method serves strictly as a temporary tourniquet meant to stop the bleeding, and you cannot maintain it for years without damaging your own body. You must view this detachment as a temporary bridge, using the saved cognitive energy to build your permanent escape route. Let us construct a day where you actively reclaim your autonomy from the corporation. You wake up and you leave your phone untouched on the nightstand, spending the first hour of the day entirely in your own world. You read a physical book, exercise outside, or cook a meal from scratch, establishing your identity firmly before the company demands your attention. You arrive at work and you define your boundaries entirely through actions, never through verbal declarations. Toxic bosses view spoken boundaries as direct challenges to their authority. You do not tell them you are unavailable after 6 o'clock. You simply stop responding at 6 o'clock. You close the laptop and put the phone in a dark drawer. They will escalate their behavior the first time you do this, manufacturing an immediate emergency and sending multiple messages to test your resolve. Behavioral psychology defines this escalation clearly as an extinction burst. When a previously rewarded behavior suddenly stops producing results, the subject will temporarily intensify the behavior. A laboratory rat pressing a lever that no longer delivers food will start mashing the lever frantically before finally giving up. Your visible emotional response serves as the reward for your boss, and when you stop providing the response, they will provoke you much harder. You must expect this escalation, observing it clinically from a safe distance while refusing to cave to the pressure. Within a few weeks, their nervous system registers that the effort yields absolutely no reward, and they will inevitably move on to an easier target. You must fundamentally restructure how you view your career while you execute this strategy. Modern society trains us to attach our entire self-worth to our professional output, believing our job title dictates our ultimate value as a human being. This intense cultural conditioning makes us incredibly vulnerable to abusive authority figures. When your boss criticizes your work, your brain interprets the criticism as a literal attack on your soul. You remove this vulnerability by heavily diversifying your identity. You need a rich life outside of that building, including hobbies where you act as a complete beginner and relationships that have absolutely nothing to do with your industry. When your entire world exists within the walls of your office, a toxic boss holds immense power over your psyche. When your job serves merely as a financial transaction that funds your actual life, their power shrinks to its proper microscopic dimensions. Historical philosophers understood this concept deeply. In the year 68 AD, the philosopher Epictetus lived as a slave in Rome under a brutal master named Epaphroditus. His physical body belonged entirely to a sadistic owner, yet Epictetus realized he could only survive by completely separating his physical reality from his internal judgment. He trained his mind to observe his suffering without absorbing it into his core identity, concluding that no individual can force you to feel degraded without your explicit consent. We possess infinitely more leverage than Epictetus had in Rome. We can resign, and we can walk out the front door, yet we forget our leverage because the constant flood of stress hormones convinces us we remain permanently cornered. You prepare your exit quietly because you cannot thrive indefinitely under a toxic regime. You dedicate your newly protected mental energy strictly to updating your resume, reaching out to your private network of contacts, and applying for roles entirely outside of their sphere of influence. The psychological dynamic shifts completely the moment you start actively planning your departure. You cease to be a trapped victim and become a captive planning a precise escape. Every passive-aggressive comment from your boss becomes totally irrelevant because you know you are leaving soon. You wake up tomorrow morning and the phone buzzes loudly on the nightstand, but you let it buzz. You understand the complex biology of your fear, and you refuse to let that ancient biological response govern your morning routine. You recognize the abusive manager in the glass office for exactly what they are, behaving as profoundly insecure individuals using corporate authority to manage their own psychological deficits. You will not cure them, and you will not save them. You will execute your daily tasks with cold professional indifference, collect your paycheck, and go home to the people who actually love you. You take back your peace by realizing they never truly had the power to take it. You handed it to them. Tomorrow, you keep it.